breathe in. The air inside your helmet tastes like rust, old sweat, and the metallic tang of fear. The eye slit in front of you is no wider than a man's thumb. Through that narrow band of light, everything you see is choked with dust. And standing 10 feet away from you is a man entirely encased in 60 pounds of articulated Milanese steel. He is raising a warhammer above his head with both hands. You already know, in the deepest, most animal part of your brain that has stopped thinking in words, that the beautiful jewel-encrusted sword in your right hand is not going to save you. Because the man in front of you did not bring a sword. He brought the ugly weapon. The tool. The thing nobody hangs above the fireplace. The weapon that gets left out of the grand oil paintings, the tapestries, and the Hollywood movies. In the next 90 seconds, which is less time than it takes to boil an egg, one of you is going to be lying face down in the mud. And it will not be because someone won a duel of honor. It will be because someone won a fist fight. Stop and look at this moment. The men in this scene are lords. They own vast estates. They speak French and read Latin. They have coats of arms passed down for generations. And yet, the weapon in the winner's hands looks like something a stone mason would use to smash rocks in a quarry. Why would the absolute elite of medieval Europe, the wealthiest warriors on earth, fight with something so crude? The answer is not what the movies have told you. Watch closely, because in about a minute, that man with the hammer is going to bring it down. His opponent will drop to one knee, and everything you have ever been taught about knights fighting knights will be shattered. There will be no cinematic sword thrust through the chest plate. There will be no clean, honorable kill. What actually finishes an armored man is small, quiet, and takes almost no strength at all. The men who did it for a living did not talk about it at feasts. By the time this story is over, you will know exactly how a knight killed another knight. Not the fairy tale version, the real version. You will know why the sword was never the star of the medieval battlefield, which weapons were actually feared, and you will understand something the veterans of that brutal world understood in their very bones. When two armored men fought to the death, it looked like a factory accident. Let us go back into the dust, back into the press of bodies, back to the exact moment the sword became completely useless. The knight on the ground is named Julian. Julian is not one specific man. He represents every man who ever fought in full plate armor on a European battlefield between the years 1350 and 1500, an era when the armor got so incredibly good that the weapons had to become monstrous to keep up. Julian is 22 years old. He is a duke's second son. He was told from the age of 7 that the sword was the absolute pinnacle of combat, the noblest weapon in Christendom. And in about 60 seconds he is going to learn that everything he was taught was a lie. The man standing over him is named Thomas. Thomas is 40 years old. He is a professional. He has fought in 8 distinct military campaigns. He has been captured and ransomed twice. Thomas learned a very hard lesson a long time ago. He learned that against a man wearing hardened steel plate, you do not slash. You do not thrust from a distance. You close the gap. You grapple. You pin them to the earth, and you attack the tiny places the armor does not cover. He learned this the hard way, by swinging a sword and watching it do absolutely nothing. This is the great secret of the medieval era. The sword was a symbol. It was a status marker. The sword was what you wore at court, what you drew at ceremonies, and what the bishop blessed in the chapel. On the actual battlefield, the sword was merely a sidearm. It was the medieval equivalent of a modern soldier's pistol, useful in the last few frantic seconds of your life, but almost never the tool that decided a fight against a fully armored opponent. The beautiful cross-hilted, elegantly balanced knightly sword was never designed to defeat plate armor. The physics of a steel sword blade striking a curved, hardened steel breastplate is roughly the same as trying to chop down an oak tree with a butter knife. The blade will glance off, it will slide, it will bend, it will vibrate in your hand until your bones ache, but it will not cut. So, how did we get from the shining myth of the swordsman to 2 exhausted men in dented metal, trying to beat each other to death with industrial tools? Because reality on the battlefield always wins. By the late 14th century, a properly equipped man-at-arms wore a full harness of steel, head to toe, articulated at every single joint. A complete harness cost roughly what a small farm cost. If you could afford one, You were practically a walking tank. You were almost impossible to kill with a sword. It took a weapon that did not care about the steel plates. A weapon designed for blunt force trauma. This world produced 3 weapons that truly mattered. The mace, which was heavy and blunt, designed to transfer concussive shock straight through the armor and into the flesh and bone beneath. The warhammer, which operated on the same principle but featured a vicious spike on the reverse side for hooking into gaps. And the poleaxe, a 5-foot-long hybrid of an axe head, a hammer face, and a spear point. The poleaxe was the single most feared close combat weapon of the late medieval battlefield. It is the morning of the battle. The sun is not yet fully up. Thomas is sitting on a stool in a canvas tent that smells of wet earth and horses. His squire is laying out 2 weapons. On the left is the arming sword. It is magnificent. On the right, uglier, heavier, and completely functional, is the warhammer. Thomas picks up the hammer. He hands the sword to his squire and tells him to buckle it to his waist, just in case. He does not explain the choice. The squire will understand by nightfall, or the squire will be dead. When the battle finally begins, the first thing that happens is not close combat. It is the cavalry charge. A mounted knight carries a lance 14 feet long, braced against his body so the entire weight of a galloping warhorse drives the steel point forward. It is the most kinetic, devastating weapon on any pre-gunpowder battlefield, and it is disposable. The lance is designed to shatter on impact. When the charge hits the enemy line, the sound is not a single crash. It is a deafening series of impacts. Dozens, then hundreds of lances shattering, men screaming and horses going down. Within 1 minute of contact, visibility on the field collapses. The dust kicked up by thousands of hooves turns the air thick and brown. You cannot see more than 10 feet in any direction. Banners disappear. Formations dissolve. This is the moment the sword becomes a liability. There is no space to swing it. Thomas is on foot now. His horse was killed by an arrow to the neck. A standard, ugly, highly efficient infantry tactic. He rolled clear before the 1,000-pound animal could crush his legs. He is bruised, but his armor is holding. Inside his helmet, Thomas is breathing heavily. The metal is fogging an inch from his eyes. He can hear his own pulse hammering in his ears, louder than the screams around him. His mouth tastes like copper because he bit the inside of his cheek when he fell. He cannot turn his head without turning his entire upper body. He is not thinking about his noble lineage. He is thinking about his lungs, and he is thinking about the next man he sees through the visor slit. Through the brown haze, he sees Julian. He sees the young man holding a beautiful, polished sword. Thomas knows exactly how this is going to end. He starts walking toward Julian, not running. You never run in mud while wearing 60 pounds of steel, because if you trip, you are dead. He walks fast, his hammer raised, angled to block whatever the young man tries to do. Julian strikes first. He does exactly what his fencing masters taught him. He brings the sword down in a sweeping diagonal cut aimed at Thomas's neck. The blade connects with Thomas's steel shoulder plate. It slides off. It bounces harmlessly into the air, leaving nothing but a silver scratch on the steel. Julian feels the impact travel back up the blade into his wrist. For one long, terrifying second, his mind freezes. The move he practiced 10,000 times in the courtyard did not work. That second is all Thomas needs. Thomas steps inside the sword's reach, rendering the long blade completely useless. He brings the warhammer around in a short, ugly, chopping arc. He doesn't aim for the head. He aims for the outside of Julian's left knee. The joint is armored, but it is an articulation point. The metal is thinner there. The sheer concussive shock of the hammer face travels straight through the steel and into Julian's bone. Julian's leg buckles. He staggers. In a fight between 2 men in full plate, staggering is a death sentence. Thomas drops his hammer. This is the part Hollywood refuses to show. Dropping your main weapon looks like a mistake to a modern audience. But at this range, grappling is the only way to win. Thomas grabs Julian by the breastplate with his left hand and by the wrist of his sword arm with his right. They wrestle. All around them, hundreds of other men are doing the exact same thing. It is a slow, grinding, physically exhausting scrum. Men who fall in this crush are often not killed by weapons. They are suffocated, trampled into the mud, under the weight of other armored men. Thomas hooks his leg behind Julian's knee and drives his weight forward. It is a wrestling throw older than written history. Julian goes down hard on his back. The impact knocks the wind out of his lungs. His sword arm is pinned under his own body. Thomas drops his entire weight onto Julian's chest, kneeling heavily on the young man's steel ribs. Julian cannot get up. Nobody flat on their back in full plate, with another armored man kneeling on their chest, ever gets up. Thomas reaches to his right hip. He pulls out a small, specialized dagger called a rondel. It has a triangular, needle-like blade. It is not designed for cutting meat. It has no edge. It is designed for one singular purpose, pushing through the tiny gaps in a man's armor. The visor slot, the armpit, the back of the knee, the groin. Thomas's steel gauntlet clamps around the dagger's hilt. He has done this before. He forces his left hand into Julian's visor and yanks the helmet upward, exposing the soft throat beneath the chin. Julian is thrashing wildly, fighting for his life like a trapped animal. But the weight on his chest is too much. The needle-pointed dagger slides into the gap at the throat. It finds soft tissue immediately. Julian stops thrashing. That is what killing an armored man actually looked like. It was a mugging in a steel can. But why did Thomas kill him? This brings us to the second, hidden half of medieval warfare: the economy of blood. In a typical battle, Thomas would have looked at the crest on Julian's shield. If he recognized it as a wealthy house, he would have placed the dagger at the eye slit and demanded that Julian yield. Julian would have surrendered, and Thomas would have taken him prisoner. A captured nobleman was not put in a dungeon. He was a financial asset. He would be treated as a guest while messengers rode to his family with a massive ransom demand. Estates were mortgaged. Villages were taxed into starvation, all to buy back captured sons. Capturing a wealthy knight could make a professional soldier incredibly rich for the rest of his life. The warhammer was brilliant precisely because it allowed a man to disable his opponent without killing him. A cracked knee or a stunned skull meant a live prisoner. A live prisoner meant gold. But Julian didn't yield fast enough, or the battle was too chaotic, so Thomas finished the job. Within an hour of Julian's death, looters descend on the battlefield. They are camp followers, peasants, and soldiers. They pry the expensive Milanese steel off Julian's dead body. His breastplate is sold to a merchant. His beautiful, useless sword is picked up by a common archer as a trophy. Julian is thrown into a mass grave with 100 other men. So why do we believe in the myth of the noble swordsman? Because the men who fought the battles did not write the history books. The history was written by monks, by clerics, and by poets employed by kings. They needed the violence to mean something. They needed the slaughter to be divine and honorable. They wrote of sweeping swords and noble duels, sanitizing the muddy, exhausting, suffocating reality of men butchering each other with hammers and knives. Centuries later, Victorian writers and artists fell in love with these romanticized chronicles. They painted the gleaming knights we see today. But if you want the truth, look at the actual combat manuals from the 14th and 15th centuries. Look at the works of masters like Fiore de Liberi and Hans Talhofer. Half of their books are dedicated to wrestling, tripping, breaking arms, and sliding daggers into eye sockets. They teach the art of murder, plainly and without romance. The true knight was a professional killer wrapped in expensive engineering. The sword you thought was the story was never the story. The mud, the wrestling, and the hammer, that was the war.